Guys, please carry on.
Oh yeah, sure. Anyone wants to go first with their initial impressions? Samartha, how about you?
Yeah, sure. So I kind of liked it. I think it was engaging. I know engaging is a vague word, but it was. I've seen a few journalism. I've not seen documentaries per se, but I've seen movies that have been based off of things like the Watergate scandal, the Robert Redford Dustin Hoffman movie, and there was one with Michael Keaton that was set in the Boston Globe, I think. So it was nice to see an actual documentary where someone's put the camera on the floor on the reporting floor and captured the action. It was very interesting. It was I started seeing it and didn't let go till it ended. And I like the various points of view of what's happening, and then the battle between. So this is around 2010. It's really interesting because right around the time when the internet started to pose a significant threat to the existence of conventional print journalism, right? And I remember in 2010 when the sales started being newspaper sales started being a threat in the US, like people started asking, how is this going to survive, right? And this is right around then, so it's very cool to see the various viewpoints from within especially the New York Times, and yeah, it's just very engaging. So the New York Times is still around, right? I think they're still holding strong. Am I right or am I wrong?
Yeah, that's still doing. I think they've made about 500 million in their subscription from their subscription product last year or so. So they have managed to survive.
Not bad, amazing. I think that's one of to me that was one of the most that was at the core of this documentary. Why this paper is kind of special and how they've gone through all the tough times. So yeah, with that, I leave it to the rest. I just found it very interesting and fun to watch and learn new things about print journalism and the war between digital media and print journalism. So I let others go.
And Anandita, what were your first impressions?
Yeah, I think I really liked the documentary because one, we actually got to see the discussions that happened before a story broke. But at the same time, I think the overall agenda of the documentary was to touch upon how do you really sustain good journalism in this digital age. Um, how do you still have good reporting on the field and on the ground, and how do you sustain that? I think that's an ongoing discussion that has been happening for the last 10 over a decade or so. And I think there are a lot of studies around, not a lot, but at least there are definitely some studies and podcasts that I've come across where they talk about how, with the death of every local um, uh, media, or say like local paper, right? Every time a local paper dies, the crime rate, the rate of the crime rate, or like corruption levels, that goes up by like some percentage. This is a study that I heard about this on NPR had covered it. So I think that's very important. I do think that we it's very important to know where you're getting your news from, especially in today's day and age as well. And I think for me, one of the things that I would have liked seeing more, probably back then it wasn't as it wasn't covered in the documentary, was about the rise of independent journalism, right, and the importance that they play. But we were, of course, the documentary primarily focused on how do you really sustain journalism, and I think that's still the question today. So I found it pretty interesting, but I definitely enjoyed the the talks and the discussions before a story broke. So that was fun to watch.
And Al, why don't you go ahead too?
Yeah, sure. So I don't have sort of much to say, but so I love any movie that feeds my notes. So I've got this bad habit of like whenever I'm watching a movie, I always sort of sit with a notebook to either write things that are there in the movie itself, or my reflection of the thing that I saw in the movie. So that sort of a thing. And this thing, this documentary, this film, whatever you want to call it, it just gave me. It was totally unexpected actually. So say if you're watching some Wes Anderson stuff, you'd expect a lot of stuff to come up, right? But with this, I totally did not expect it. But there were some really nice quotes and ideas. Like one good example would be how we think about news as like just another source of entertainment, right? Like you just wake up in the morning and it's just something to sort of read when you're sitting, on the throne, and you don't give much thought to it, or like traveling on the bus, commuting. But there was this one scene in which the narrator was like, news has historically been information, and he links it to there's this whole thing in the stock market where you have like an arbitrage opportunity where something is going to change in the landscape, and therefore you sort of adjust your bets accordingly. And as a result of which, when that thing actually breaks, you sort of come out as the least hurt, or sort of you've sort of covered your position, and that is all thanks to the information that you had. That's kind of what I mean, that's actually everything that news is, but in a more personal way, or at least it should be. And yeah, although that's a super obvious thing, I don't know why I never really thought about it in that way, that news is information that is actionable. And yeah, that's something that I sort of picked out along with many other things. So I think for that reason, this was really cool. And another really chill part was Carr, David Carr, like the way, just his persona, like just the way in which he was covered as a human being, as a character, the way he deals with other people, and yeah, I just found that to be kind of beautiful and unexpected. Yeah, that's my take.
So I'll also drop my quick initial thoughts before we move on. But I thought the documentary was pretty informational, but the characters were very interesting, especially David Carr, as Al already mentioned. The whatever was going on in the background, conflicts and the arguments that were going on were compelling, but I don't know if it was there were too many of them for it to build to anything. What do you say? To build to anything greater. I feel it is trapped in the 2010 era when it was made, and I mean it as a compliment because it is still a valuable insight. Almost all the news media sources, representatives or CEOs with whom David Carr was talking to are now are either closed down or failures or are already on the path of going down, and the New York Times is still doing pretty well. So that's pretty interesting to see that nothing much has changed.
So I'm not sure if we can say that nothing much has changed. I think the reason I disagree with that is because Facebook, for example, has been a reason why a lot of the independent media and local journalism has also died. And so, for example, Facebook as well played a big role in, say, the death of college humor and famous other um, small video companies or entertainment companies as well, primarily because of their fraudulent way of like reporting and blatant lying of the metrics. Right? Everybody thought, yeah, like going online is going to save our business, and that's what you could see even with when Apple launched their tablets, they really thought they could figure it out. But I think a lot has changed. I do like if you look at the number of local papers and independent media sources that have died since the turn of the century, it's massive, and I do think that there is a serious crisis in terms of accessing good sources of news and not being hounded down by, just really crappy newspaper. Like I feel today, and that's what's also happening with, what we see with the misinformation. I feel a lot has changed by just going online, and I think there's with the fact that a lot of these media houses and media journalistic companies and print companies are facing issues is because they still haven't really found a good way to sustain their business, because everything is all about, yeah, what metrics are you tracking, right? Like, are you really making money off this, if you report about this corrupt politician, or are you going to make money if you say something about this celebrity scandal, right? And it's such a good technique as well, right? Because we just measure by those. That's what these large capitalistic companies love doing. They measure the wrong things. They don't care about altruistic values anyways. And I feel the media or these journalist houses, they have to bend their back as well, just to survive. And so I still worry about how journalism or reporting is going to look down this, few years down the line. Thankfully, people have embraced paywalls more. It's going to take some time before I think it's the pure way of making money. Uh, but for example, all your other media houses, like even just during COVID time, right? The print and of course, the print might not be the best example, but a lot of these other uh, uh, newspaper companies or the journalistic companies as well, they were literally like on the brink of just shutting down, and they were the ones who delivered some good news, and like they weren't really backed by the government and other or like other conglomerates like Reliance and stuff like that. So I feel a lot has changed, and I feel it's still a very the future doesn't look as it still is not there. The future, it still is very uncertain for such companies. Sorry, just to add one more point. And because of that, we will have fewer folks trying to enter this profession, or have fewer companies making these companies, starting up such companies as well. So I think that's something that I think is still of concern, if that makes sense.
Perhaps what I was looking at was the status quo has not changed that much. Sure, people do get their, fake news or their entertainment news from other sources, but New York Times is still the gold standard for journalism, and it's just that because of the internet, people can have a far greater choice in what they want to read, and so far it is looking like people like to read what affirms their belief, and uh, a lot of companies they don't mind playing the game. But yeah, anyways, going back to where I began, I don't think the status quo has changed that much. Sure, they are probably facing going through a lot of financial struggles, but has the status quo truly changed? Yeah, Anandita,
I don't think it has. Like, for example, one of the so when New York Times announced that they're going to have a paywall, you have to pay for it after you've read so many articles online. There was this one of the criticism was that, hey, information was always free. Why are we paying for it now? It's internet, everything's supposed to be free. So that I think that still feels like that's what people still expect. I do think that sentiment still remains, that it's the internet age. Why are we still paying for news? But the other status quo that has changed is that right now, you don't really know what truly the incentives are, when certain companies print a certain thing. You sort of have to think about who are they backed by, or why are they writing about this, or why are they not covering the other one. So I do think the status quo has changed so much simply because there's so much pressure on the revenue that these private companies have to raise. And you also don't want so one of the comments that was made on the panel discussion that also had David Carr and a couple of other folks was that I think where they criticized Judith Miller and their previous editor for writing fake stories simply because it was assumed that, oh, it's New York Times, so it's obviously credible. And I think that's a problem with having just one person, right? Like one dominant player. um, there's suddenly like so much power in their hands. And it's the same thing what you see in like any domain, right? Like you cannot have a monopoly on things. Um, like for example, yeah. So uh, and suddenly there it is leaning towards it simply because there are much fewer companies who are reporting. Baltimore Sun, which was like such a good newspaper, such a good paper back then, which also they also had David Simon for a bit. He David Simon also wrote the for the Wire, right? He created the show Wire. There they do talk about how Baltimore Sun or their newspaper, whatever was covered in that show, that was declining. They just didn't. They showed that they weren't really particular about the sources. They didn't really verify them. They didn't vet. They just wrote words that made sense, uh, that sort of weaved a good story or thought that would get more eyeballs or more money, right? That is harmful. Like that kind of reporting is so harmful. So I do think in those aspects, it has gotten much worse. I don't think it's status quo anymore. Is that something that
That is, I just want to add before I go. I'm a huge fan of The Wire, so I'm glad you brought up David Simon. But you know, maybe the advertisement revenue has completely gone away for the newspapers, but uh, how how valid is the argument that newspapers aren't manipulating across time? How valid is the claim that fake news has become a problem today?
I have a lot of opinions on that, but I'll just wait for others to also bring up. Yeah, so I'll just pause here. Samarth or Erin, any thoughts?
I'm just listening. I'm happy to listen. I'll let you.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I didn't see that.
I mean, it'll be great if you guys could give your opinion and your own experiences, or what do you guys know about this? I mean, it's just a discussion. Al, you've been.
Yeah, so I mean, I wouldn't really know. So I'm not from journalism. I'm more like the viewer. I'm more the reader guy. But yeah, like I really from that perspective is all that I can share. So I think yeah, with regard to the current thing, I think fake news was a problem always. You know, it's just that the medium has got so much more easier to access. Like the medium has made accessing good news, bad news, medium grade news so easy. Like you can, it's like an exponent. It's taken something good and then you add an exponent to it and now it's huge, and you take something bad and it's added an exponent to it and now it's huge. So I think it was a problem always. It's just that the current age and the internet has just made it more visible and prevalent. Yeah, that's what I think. So I don't think it's an issue of the internet. I think it's an issue of people. of human beings, of our inherent uh, idiocy. Like just not being able to sort of figure out what's right and what's wrong. That's what I think.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Al. But I think the social behavior, for lack of better words, the whole human aspect, right? I think drives the technology as well. Because if you, for example, if you make something viral enough, right, people may start believing it's true, and in the context of fake news and stuff like that. But it reminds me of what car, there's this scene in the documentary uh, there's some kind of a conference, and there's this young guy from blogging, who's a blogger, and then there's Carr, who's cynical at the other end of the panel, and brought up an interesting point to the blogger. He said, you guys didn't do any tours in Iraq, right, or you didn't do any tours in Afghanistan. So there is some value in uh, old school journalism in terms of bringing out the truth, compared to modern day. It's not that the modern days digital technology empowered reporting by everybody, even non-journalists, is not going to bring the truth. But like Al said, I think it brings out everything, and then it can get amplified as well. So it's a complex combination of technology and human behavior, I think, crossing the.
Yeah, even I agree with what Al said, frankly, about how I think there was always misinformation and fake news always. It's just that the medium and the distribution channels now have it's just they cast a much wider net. So everything is amplified, everything is exponential. But is that a problem? That's obviously a problem. I mean, that's why I think I would say that BJP won the election because they're fake encounters. And the fact that number of people died of corona simply because people didn't believe in vaccines. So I think there are real life implications to it, very much so. And even the whole lynching cases even the number of lynching that happened in where in UP and stuff, right? A lot of it is because of misinformation and not being able to curb those, and people believing like the source of news has changed a lot. It has moved away from papers. It's now moved to like your WhatsApp or Twitter, right? Like Twitter is a great source of news even for me today, to be honest. But the source of news or information has just changed shape, and it's just a much bigger than just the print media itself. So I think news overall comes from various different places, and because of these new ways of interacting with information, I think with that has also amplified or shown the problems of how easy it is to like have a rumor about it. Uh, so there was this one investigative piece that came out about how all of the misinformation around the vaccines and COVID basically came from 12 people. All like, I think over 95% of the articles were all written by them. Different accounts. They set up like shell companies or, companies that just pretended to be legit media sources. And it all just came from 12 people. So it has just changed so much, just simply because of the distribution channel itself.
Guys, I had a few points to make, but I might have to go in the next 15 minutes or so. So is it okay if I just run through some points, and maybe around 7 I might have to leave. So this film is paired with the film which is coming up tomorrow, and this was supposed to be a journalism weekend, kind of a double feature. So all of you who've seen this film, I highly encourage you to watch tomorrow's film as well, because they were supposed to be seen in context of each other. This film was made in 2010, and the next film coming up is made last year, 2020. And yeah, the reason I think this film is special is because it shows you a turning point in history where journalism as we know it was being challenged. It was being transformed, and even behemoth institutions like NYT had to think on their feet to find new ground, or else they faced extinction. Because through social platforms, anybody could break a news. I could type in a message saying such and such person has passed away, and I'll be retweeted more than NYT. That can happen. That does happen. And so it's very interesting to look back at what has taken place and how we came to be where we are today. So this film was chosen for that reason. That of course the landscape of journalism and media has changed forever. But how did it change? When we were going through the changes, we were too busy to notice. We were all awed by the new platforms, that you can do this on Facebook, you can do that on YouTube, and so on. But to look back and see the greater impact and the rippling effect it has had over a period of time is quite interesting. And there's a part in the docu where they focus on Vice, and Vice was the opposite, right? In this situation where every institution of journalism is struggling and failing to survive. Vice is one organization who was sitting back relaxing because they had eyes of the internet audience. All the young people were choosing Vice as their not primary, but one of their key sources of information. But the content that Vice produces is very different from the content that you expect from a great institution like NYT or Chicago Times or LA Times. So they have this meeting where David Carr sits down with the core team of Vice, and it's quite a funny scene. That these young guys, they start off very cocky in the meeting, that they're here to teach the old guys how things are done, and he talks about how they covered Liberia, and he slips up where he makes fun of the NY Times, and David Carr shuts them down in the most spectacular manner. That fine, you went to Liberia and you covered some footage and you showed human poop. Then what? What about it? It's there. What can be done? Whereas these guys, the old institutions were covering genocides and war and famine and things like that. So the point is, shock and schlock will sell clicks. But does that mean you have to give in to what people want? Or do you live by journalistic integrity and feature stories that are most important? So this is something worth thinking about, that if everything was driven by popularity, then what will remain of journalism? And I have another point regarding this. Just give me a second. Then it's worth thinking about that this new media, as we call it, right? They have powerful algorithms of personalizations, and that can be used for sinister goals when they go in the wrong hands. So do these tech platforms have any responsibility for this? Because it's not a matter of who posted first and who gets to see the content first. They are picking and choosing who gets to see what. They're curating content for every single person based on unknown parameters. So what responsibility do these platforms hold? in this changing landscape. Because in the quest to get people addicted to scrolling, they're willing to put people in a feedback loop. That means people consume X type of media because they believe in Y type of ideology. They believe in Y type of ideology because all they can access is personalized content from X media. So, one feeds the other, and then it tumbleweeds into something uncontrollable. So this concept originally back in the 2010 2009 was called the Google bubble. I think it was 2009 or 2010 they rolled out personalization features. And I had a professor in university who researches on media. He said he explained this concept to me in a very, very simple manner. Back then, the Arab Spring was going on. He said he was on a call with a friend of his, and the news broke. And he said, "You won't believe what's happening in Egypt." So he said, "Look it up." So he typed Egypt on Google, and he saw tourism related information. And when this professor Googled Egypt, he got all the news of the Arab Spring. So, that's the power of this Google bubble, as they used to call it. So this is what traditional hard news institutions are up against. So they have to not only compete with every single person who's putting information on the internet, but they also have to compete against these algorithms to be seen by the right people. But if we simply focus on, popular content or content which sell clicks, why would anyone read stories of human trafficking and genocide when they're busy reading 10 reasons why Kim Kardashian's butt deserves a bravery medal? Then one more point I had before I stop is this docu maintains an objective distance from the subject. It would have been very easy for this docu to become an advertisement for New York Times. And there are films like this. But it takes a good chunk of the film to highlight and address the very valid criticisms against New York Times. And it's not a small allegation either. Their incompetence, or so they claim, led to a war which killed thousands of people, ancient relics were lost, new terrorist groups were formed. The shockwaves of that war won't stop for the next 1 or 2 decades. It's very rare to find a neutral documentary, one that lets viewers make a judgment on the subject themselves by absorbing all the available information instead of providing your pre-digested viewpoint of the matter. So, which is why this was another reason why I thought it was important for our members to see this. Okay, I'll stop.
Just out of curiosity, I've just found out about the 2003 Iraq War. I mean, but there were various. It was not only the New York Times who were talking about the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. There was also the UK PM also in a lot of controversy because he also had that statement as a justification for invading Iraq? Or is the blame only on the New York Times?
The NYT piece was considered solid proof. So it played a big role in the decision making. That if it's coming from the New York Times, obviously they verified and confirmed the rumors. So yeah, it was treated as fact. That's why they bear a huge load of that responsibility.
I was quite shocked to learn about the about New York Times being the channel to have reported on those news. I hadn't heard of Judith Miller until this documentary. I'm actually gonna look her up. But yeah, basically that caused the war, and they still do like there's so many there are like so many countries and regions that are destabilized because of that.
Yeah, the recent Afghanistan takeover is one of the shockwaves of that war. That these effects are still going to play out in the coming years. It's far from done.
Yeah, I was also hoping to have a continuation of the New York Times effect, whether it is um, anyone else has anything to add on to that.
What do you mean by that? The New York Times effect?
I believe one of the reporters or journalists, I'm not sure,
Oh,
but
right,
they
right, right.
said how every secondary media, our sources and outlets are influenced by the New York Times.
Correct. Once NYT breaks the story, then next day the local publishers pick up the story and
Yeah,
continue
and
reporting on it.
when I'm hoping to start as a more general things about how
Hmm.
New York Times provide are a kind of authority, and this kind of bill follows on what Anandita said about New York Times being an institution in journalism.
Okay, I'm not an expert in journalism, so take
I
whatever I
mean,
say with a huge
yeah,
grain of salt. But from what I understand, there are news bureaus around the world which sell news content to anyone who's willing to buy. Um, so there is Reuters in Europe. There's ANI in India, and I forget. Correct. So Anandita said ANI. So there are Associated Press in the US. So they'll sell the same article to Fox News and CNN at the same time. So they are basically wholesale dealers of news content, and they can afford to do this because they have mini bureaus in every city, reporters in every city. Sorry about the disturbance in the back. So most news agencies depend on bureaus to supply the rest of the paper, filler content. The key stories, the front page stories, are obviously by their own journalists, but a lot of the filler content comes from bureaus. Big institutions like BBC, NYT, uh, The Guardian, they they have their own reporters on the ground. They don't depend on bureaus to do the groundwork. So that's the difference. That's why when NYT breaks a story, or Guardian breaks a story, or Washington Post breaks a story, you know that they are the first one to report on this most of the times. And there's a film which came out a couple years ago, Spotlight, great film about uh, how they built up a story and what it took to publish that, and the rippling effect of that story on the rest of the world. So I think that was about, I don't remember which paper was Spotlight about, but it had something similar. Another, I think you might know. Boston Globe. Okay, there you go. What happened? Are you guys there?
Yeah, does anyone else have anything to add on that topic?
Actually, I had just one point to add to Vivek's point. Even I felt the documentary was pretty neutral. It felt like I was watching news from DD or something. It's not supposed to, provoke you or make you get any emotions, but it was sort of very, yeah, unbiased. So I sort of agree with you on that point.
But DD is boring now. This wasn't boring. This was like fascinating. Or did you
It's
find it boring?
I wouldn't say it was boring, it was more like instructive. So it's just a
Instructive.
direct transfer of information. It's not supposed
Okay.
to uh, sort of make you support one party over the other. It's
Huh.
just supposed to be an exchange of information. So I
Right.
think that way it was a match between both the instances.
Yeah, they were trying to be as vanilla as possible. So you're right. I
So
remember
I have
seeing this. Yeah, Samadhan.
sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, Vivek. If you were saying something was
No, I was
you
just saying that when I remember seeing this film when it came out. It was sort of a big release, even though it's a documentary, even though it's an independent feature, not backed by any big studio. It was a big release, and it was, getting houseful shows. So it was a little fascinating to see. Uh, I remember when I joined, someone was saying that it's fascinating to see how things play out in the background before a story breaks. And yeah, that was fascinating because I remember the day when NYT launched that, paywall. And I remember myself thinking that I'm not going to pay for that. There's no way. I used to depend on NYT as one of the key sources, but I'm not going to go to NYT anymore. Information's free, internet is free. Why should I pay for it? But this documentary makes a compelling argument about why it's important to support sources of journalism who are doing good work. Because if they depend on ads, and that's what happened with Times of India, right? Once upon a time, they were a great institution of Indian journalism. And then, one day they decided that our business is not news, our business is selling ads. And the CEO is actually infamous for saying this. And everything changed. So all their content was available to be bought by the highest bidder. And things have never been the same for that paper since. So yeah, I was just saying when it came out, it was riveting because all these things, all these changes, you don't know what's going to stick, what's going to stay. So now when we look back at it, we already know what will happen in the future. But back then, you're getting an insight of the problems that are yet to come. So when you watch this with tomorrow's documentary, I think, a lot of things will supplement and complement each other. Samartha, please carry on.
yeah, it's a great point. But I was watching the way the camera was placed to capture some of these conversations, right? Like uh, at the office door, or it was it was at a distance and capturing the action from a distance. But I was just wondering if you worked in that office and there was a crew that was around on the floor, all the way from the CEO's office to your work floor, how naturally would you behave under the knowledge of that camera being pointed at you, right? Like, because it looked really organic. It looked like those guys were going through their daily routines. But at the same time, I was constantly wondering, wouldn't they be influenced by the fact that there's a camera pointing at them, right? So I don't know. That's how others felt about that. And that's a constant thing I feel with reality TV as well. How can you be who you are normally with the camera pointed at you? So is there any way at all to actually capture reality unless you hide a camera and people don't know about it, the subject?
I don't know what camera they used for this film, but it has to be some sort of high quality camera because the images still look good as of today.
Yeah.
But one thing I learned from someone I call a mentor and someone who taught me a lot about filmmaking is that whenever he used to shoot, he used to try to get the smallest possible camera. And his justification was simple, that even though he has the budget, he'll pick the smallest camera because it is, like you said, it doesn't make its presence known as much as a larger camera. When you have a large camera on a set, the set becomes the superstar. Sorry, the camera becomes the superstar of the set. And when your camera is small, it's easy to forget that it's there. And he had shown me footage. See, this is footage shot with this camera, and this is footage shot with that camera. These are regular people, in his family, um, and everything is so natural in the other footage, because after a while people just forget that this camera is even there. So I'm sure they did something like this for this film, but I don't know what model, what make camera they were using.
So, how would they go typically? I'm just wondering how would they go about doing this? Would they just tell the employees, we'll just show up at any floor at any time, just go on with your day, or you think they have schedules? Like we'll work with this particular person, and because the more you see what I'm getting at, right? The more there's a schedule, a rhythm, and the camera pointed at you, then I start asking, how natural are the things that you're seeing?
I'm assuming this they follow the same routine as uh, what behind the scenes documentaries used to be 15 years ago. Now they've become very polished and organized, but if you look at some of the old making of documentaries, it's just one guy running around with a camera, talking to people, that kind of thing. So I would call this, man on the ground type documentary.
And like you said, with a very minimized crew and equipment, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I can speak for behind the scenes documentaries because I know a little bit about that. Is that before the show begins, or before the shooting begins, all crews are made aware of the fact that this guy and this guy are responsible for behind the scenes. They may come, they may go, pretend they're not there. Let them do their job. And they're often silent, they're just observing with a camera. And yeah, they can show up at any department at any time. I'm assuming that's what they did for this film. Because like you said, if you put things on a calendar saying that 9 a.m. I'm going to be in the editorial, 2 p.m. I'm going to be down with the delivery boys, the organic part is gone. And I'm also assuming they're shooting a metric ton of footage and then just choosing bits from it. So that
Oh
also
yeah,
puts
oh
people at ease that, what, this probably won't even make the cut.
yeah,
So yeah.
yeah, interesting. Because when they show the editor's room, the main editor's room, right, and WikiLeaks is being broken out. That's a critical moment of journalism history, right? And I was just wondering if the CEO and those guys are wondering, what the hell is the camera doing in the room when we are trying to break this news, right? That would be a natural reaction because
Yeah,
not
it's a
not
big
about
moment.
disdain for the film, but yeah, it's such a critical moment, and somebody's pointing the camera. Should we have lawyers in to make sure should we film this or not or whatever? But very interesting. I overall I felt was very the reactions of the people was like as if there was no camera, which was amazing because they're not actors, right? So I was just fascinated by how organic it felt.
Yeah, at the same time, the documentary is quite polished in itself. It doesn't look like an amateur home video documentary. It does look professionally put together. So credit where due, they managed to make it look like a proper film, even though it's man on the ground footage.
For me, I would like to add that one big reason why I liked the documentary was especially David Carr and the various, counter arguments he comes up, he provides that support that argue for the existence of the New York Times or a large publishing houses. And that was for me my most favorite part. The various people inside it were very interesting. And I also believe David Carr has released. I just found out after the documentary, he also wrote a pretty famous memoir about his time of being a drug addict. So, yeah. Hello? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you, Karthik.
Yeah,
Karthik, sorry.
if anyone has any other thing to discuss or any other idea or any other thought to go down, you guys can go ahead.
So I wanted to put out a generic question, which is kind of the theme of the whole documentary, but I want people's opinions on it, which is ultimately journalism, which comes from people who are trained in journalism, in reporting, who have a formal background and who are basically talented in the field, versus somebody is taking a cell phone in a crowd and capturing action and making a viral video. Where do you see the world headed to? Will it be a coexistence of these two things, or will one dominate over the other? And papers become print journalism become absolutely insignificant. So where do you see it going in the next 10 or 15 years?
I had some thoughts about that. Um, if you look at our history, a lot of things were passed by oral traditions. So all epics and all these things were passed by, the guru teaching the students through mouth. So then, after this advent of the Gutenberg printing press. So then people started getting more access to books, and the access to education and text became um, much more readily available to everyone. So throughout our history, if you look at it, things have been changing. So the people who adapt to the situation survive, and the people who stick to the old ways remain obsolete. So if you look at it that way, I feel like probably there'll be a new age in journalism. You could probably get new type of creators or something which is like a hybrid model of the print and the online media. Or yeah, I feel like it could be more it's coming from all parts of the society. So when you consider newspaper and magazine and things like that, a lot of them are backed by influential people in the society. So we may not get access to people from the disadvantaged parts of the society. So probably in a way it could be good because people get news from every part of the world, is what I think.
Anybody else have anything to add to that? Al, it's been a while.
Uh, yeah, no, I'm actually just listening to you guys. It's good fun. All of this, these new ideas, and I'm just absorbing that.
And another anything opinion on this? Because it was kind of a general question, right? I'll go after you.
Not many thoughts on this. Why don't you go?
Um, I don't know. I think they will eventually, perhaps have to find a way where they work together. I mean, but for me, a far more compelling question was about these bloggers and their self-righteous attitude they had. Hello, welcome back, Samantha.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. There was some abrupt power cut and I lost Wi-Fi. It was a mess. But uh, Sharanya, your thoughts were very interesting. I'm sorry I cut off the whole guru thing that you were mentioning and the oral tradition. I found it fascinating. So I'll check it out on YouTube. But I wanted to hear how you finished that argument. It was interesting.
Basically, I just said that there's always been a technological shift from one thing to another. So before we had oral traditions, and then we had the Gutenberg printing
Yeah,
press,
yeah,
which led to a lot of books and everything. So from books, we also got this print and media, so which were controlled by certain parts of the society. And then now it's moving to social media where it's sort of democratized. Everyone has, okay, theoretically everyone has access to it, and more people can like put out their views and thoughts on things. So I think the challenge would be that how are you going to filter the news and figure out which is the genuine source as compared to fake news.
yeah.
So the point I was just making was that eventually the print guys will also have to give in to the technological change, or else they can become obsolete.
Correct, correct. So, but one interesting point you just made, and Kritik, sorry to interrupt. You were saying something. I'll just finish off this point. The when you said the democratization, right? I used to believe that like 2 to 3 years ago, but then with all the recent information that's come out about invasion of privacy, selling data across platforms, and all this, it makes me wonder. Like the way they were criticizing the Chicago Tribune guy or Vivek mentioned the Times of India CEO saying we are in the ads business, not in the journalism business. Do you feel modern social media outlets will end up being like old school outlets with the same old flaws, except they're having a digital platform because ultimately they're controlled by humans who are flawed. By the way, that's a phrase they use in the documentary. If you remember that, so they go back to the old New York Times in the 30s or 40s, and somebody makes a comment saying it was controlled by flawed human beings. So, end of the day, do you feel it will revert to old school even in the digital platform? And, is it really democratized? That's my dilemma. But I'll throw it open to the others. And again, Kritik, please go ahead. I came in and interrupted while you were saying something.
No problem. We'll finish this thing up and then we can move on. Anyone have anything to add to what Samartha said?
No, I guess.
Hmm. But yeah, I actually kind of moved on to your second question, Samartha, and I was thinking more of regarding the democratization with regards to the documentary. I was thinking more of the bloggers and the attitude they have, about how about how they have more freedom and legacy media outlets are hampered by financial, political, whatever the reasons be, and blogging is the future. And it was kind of an interesting time capsule to see how seriously they took themselves.
Yeah.
Do you guys have? I mean, I think I've made my opinions about the bloggers pretty clear, but do you guys have any conflicting ideas?
Not really. I think I sort of agree with you. It's not just the bloggers, also the TikTok influencers and all the Instagrammers. It's I don't think the quality of the news is going to be more concentrated. You're just going to have a lot of white noise. So you need to figure out exactly where you're going to get your news from amidst the noise.
Yeah, the quality would be a definite factor in the, but for me, at least, something more interesting was who would be held responsible for any kind of fake news. And in the document itself, they showed that the journalists who were unethical got fired, or I think the woman who made the false thing about the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq also had some legal problems. But yeah, and the also the editor was chief editor also resigned. So I was pretty happy to see that there is a chain of responsibility and consequences to the actions, consequences to their actions in the New York Times. And do you guys think that is there? I don't see that anywhere in when uh, if in these kind of uh, blogging or other forms of news outlets. I would, if if no one has anything to add, I would also want to bring in the discussion about these independent news platforms and the rise in India. To be honest, I don't know much about them, but the only thing I know about them was this really funny clip from Republic TV or Republic Now of Arnab Goswami screaming at them. But if any of you have anything to add to uh, independent media companies, even outside of India, you guys can go ahead.
Yeah, I have a few recommendations there. So I think even I have been very cognizant about where I get my news from. So I pay for the News Minute, which is based out of Bangalore, but they also do a lot of cover. They also cover Andhra and couple and Tamil Nadu and Kerala as well right now. Caravan is a great source. Alt News is great at busting fake news or the fabricated news that the government loves to peddle. Um, and Scroll. So these are the four that I tend to just stick to. So I can just write it down in the chat too.
From what? Yeah. Before I go ahead, does anyone have anything else? No, right? The funny thing which I want to bring up was uh, one independent news media organization which I was mildly interested about, and I don't think it is held in high regard for the past couple of years, but was this thing, Tehelka magazine. And I always found out that was kind of interesting because it is a kind of entrapment of. Basically what they did was entrapment of high-ranking officials. I think it was Tehelka magazine. The Tehelka magazine. Yeah, it was pretty popular around the 2000s.
Yeah, that's right. They were into investigative journalism. I remember some of those videos that had come out when I think they got a bunch of scandals in between. Yeah, I mean, I don't remember much. It was definitely mid 2000.
Yeah, that's an interesting debate over there. Does it become investigative journalism or is it just entrapment?
Yeah, that's an
Um,
interesting point to make. What is the balance and where do you draw the line?
does anyone have anything else to add? Because I'm all out of ideas, guys. And if not, we can close the session or something.
I think we can go ahead and close.
Yeah, same here. I'm out of ideas too. So go ahead, close.
Okay, guys, I'll end the live stream then. But I think Sharana, can you message the organizers and tell them to end the live stream on YouTube also?
Sure. Who started it? Do you know?
I think Vivek started it, but I think as long as anyone has a login, they can do it.
Okay.